Hi, everyone. So in our previous session, we talked about the basics of HTML, and all the examples we showed were actually just black and white pages. And the last example that we showed a page something like this. But in actual web pages, you actually see different designs and colors. So probably this one can be shown even better if it looks like this, right? Or if it looks like this. So the question is, how do we apply these designs on a web page? And the answer is CSS. So let's talk about CSS, what CSS is. So CSS means cascading style sheets. By cascading style sheets, it's a kind of a style sheet. And this idea actually comes from the printing industry. So very short, briefly speaking, style sheets are actually being used in the printing industry for hundreds of years. This was style sheets were used for desktop publishing, and it was being used to uh, do the designs on after doing the printings, putting colors, colored printing, etc., etc. Now, cascaded style sheet is the same thing, but it's formatted for and it provides the functionality of the style sheets, which was in the traditional printing industry. And but this one it gives the same advantage, same kind of concept for web developers, right? So it's a flexible cross-platform, and it's very much a standardized language developed by the same organization who who regulate HTML. So this is what in this figure, you can see how a single cascaded style sheet file can do a design for for a whole website. Say your website has, say, four pages, web pages, and you can use just one single style sheet file and apply the rules, design rules there to every other HTML file, right? So a single cascading style sheet file can control the color, typography, and the layout of multiple web pages. So overall, the advantages of CSS is uh, you can keep your styling separate from the structure. That means your HTML file and your style sheet files can be totally separate. And as a result, what happens is, say, you are applying the same kind of style on 4 different pages, right? If you had done the styling individually on pages, right, you had to put all these rules, say all these rules here, also here, also here. So now you are putting all the rules in one place and applying them to all other files. So these files become smaller, right? And also the maintenance is easier. So if you want to change some style, you don't need to go and say change here, 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 and here. Instead, you can just change here and boom, everything can be changed, right? So smaller files, better organization, keeping the design and the structure different. Those are the advantages of CSS. Now, there are 4 major types of cascading style sheets. We are going to discuss first 3 of them. And the 4th one is similar to the 3rd one. We are not going to discuss that. So these 4 types are inline styles, embedded styles, external styles, and imported styles. Okay. First, very brief description of inline style. So inline style is done inside the body section. This is very important. You are already familiar what a body section is, right? And it is used uh, with HTML style attribute. You also are know what attribute is, right? So for this kind of styling, we don't use any different HTML element. We just use some attributes inside existing HTML elements. So this is important. And this one applies only to specific elements. So this one makes sense because you are using an attribute inside an element. So if you are using that attribute inside an element, only that element is going to be affected, right? Whereas the embedded style, this one is done inside the head section. And for this one, we use a separate element, which is called the HTML style element. And this kind of styling applies to the entire web page document, not just to one element. So you can use the style in anywhere in your web page. Next, the external style. External style is like similar to the embedded style, but it's a separate text file with a .css file extension. It's a totally separate text file. And then how do you associate the HTML file with the CSS file? This is how you do it. You have to use a link element. So we learn about this element, link element, in the head section of the web page. Okay. And finally, the imported one, we are not going to discuss this. This is similar to the external style, but this is beyond the scope of today's discussion. Okay, so let's talk about CSS syntax, how CSS rules are written. So style sheets are composed of rules that describe the styling to be applied. And each rule contains a selector and a declaration. Remember, each rule contains a selector and a declaration. This is how it looks. So suppose we want to use CSS to set text color to blue, okay, inside the body. So this is my assignment. Like I have a web page. Inside the body, I want to just text all the text color, set all the text color to blue. So first part is the selector, where this is the name of the element which I want to get affected or which I want to change. So this is the selector, and then this is the rule. And the rule has like two parts. One is the property. So this is the property part. And then there is the value. Okay. So how do I know which properties I can use? We'll talk about that. But before that, let's see like the same assignment. Say if I want to do other things, so not only I want to change the text color to blue, I want to change the background color to yellow, right? So in that case, you in the same uh, declaration, you put two declaration, 1 and 2, and you just separate them by semicolons. It's simple. By semicolons, you change the uh, you just separate the declarations, and each declaration has two parts: declaration property and declaration value. Property value. Okay. So you can see the values we can put just in words, blue, yellow, or we can use hexadecimal numbers. Obviously hexadecimal is useful. You understand why, because with just the name we can put blue, yellow, red, but we have just very limited number of color names. Whereas if you use hexadecimal values, you can just make all kind of palettes, right? With this you can make like 65,000 plus colors. Okay, so going back to the question, like how do I know what properties we have? So here are some of the properties. These are the common properties for creating CSS rules. So background color, means text color. You can change the font family, font size, font style, font weight, etc., etc. And then you can change the margin, text alignment, width of the element, etc. Right? So we'll revisit some of these soon, but these are the common ones. Probably you want to remember these ones. Okay, so if I want to put color, we already showed you that there are two ways. One is name of the color, or even the better way is like the hexadecimal value, but there are also two other ways. You can just put the values with comma separation. So you can put RGB, red, green, blue, or you can put 255 00. So basically, if I look for this, so this is the representation of 255. So this part is the representation of 0, and this part is the representation of B, right? Okay. So this is something we already know. Red means actually 255 0 0, right? Green means 0 255 0, right? Black means all 0. White means everything is 255, and gray is this. Well, the thing is, it's difficult to remember all the hexadecimal color values. Obviously, we can remember red, green, blue, black, white, or even gray. But how do we remember like other colors? It's not possible, right? So there is online you will find different color charts. So we call it color palette. So web color palette. Here is a color chart website. There you can go and see different. It will show you all the colors and uh, their corresponding hexadecimal code. So you can just, instead of just remembering this, we actually cannot remember this. We can just go to web color palettes and look at them and use the whatever color shade I want. I can just use that CSS value as hexadecimal value. And the colors are very important uh, on a page, right? It's important to select correct colors. So the colors that you can use is monochromatic color. So this, so I'm just keeping it short. So you have to make sure that if you're using multiple colors in your page, make sure that there is sufficient contrast, right? Between, say, your font color and your background. Say if your background is deep and your font color is deep, probably it would be very difficult to read the fonts. So make sure that you have sufficient contrast. And there are also pages or servers where you can submit your HTML document code and see if uh, potentially there is less contrast, or it will give you suggestions that, yeah, you have enough contrast in your page or not. Anyways, now coming back to the discussion again, if you remember, we said like there are 4 ways to do CSS designing. First one was the inline CSS. And we said like inline CSS is configured in the body of the web page, and it uses an attribute called style. It uses the style attribute inside the HTML tag. And as a result, what happens is this rule will be applied only to that specific element. Okay. So for example, say we want to configure red color text to one heading 1 element, right? In that case, what we do is, you see we have this heading element and this is the closing tag. Inside that, we use this style attribute, and we have a value, right? Now the value has 2 parts. You remember the CSS syntax, right? The declaration has 2 parts. One is the property and the second part is the value. Okay, so we put, say, color. This is RGB red. So this one will change the color of this heading to red. Say another example, we want to configure red text in the heading with a gray background, right? So in that case, what you do is, you see we have this style attribute, and then we have this declaration, right? So this whole thing. And this is like semicolon separated. So first declaration says color, this is font color is going to be red. And the second declaration, background hyphen color. So background color is going to be gray, right? So this will show this text into red with a gray background. Okay, so let me show you examples of inline, how inline CS is being used. Control Shift I. You see here that this HTML document has a head section where there is no styling in the head and a body section. And inline style is always done in body. So you see style rule is being used here. Sorry, style attribute. And this one has the value. Background color is going to be this, and the text color is going to be this. Okay, and you see that that rule is being applied. For the heading, so this is the rule for the body, right? So what happens is this paragraph is inside the body, right? So this one actually gets is styled from this rule, from body's rule. Now inside the body, we have a heading 1 element. You see that. And that one also applies inline styling. So you can see that the inline styling is being applied here. So here is one thing. If you put like multiple elements inside the body and that element doesn't have a style of its own, then it will inherit the style from its parent element, because this paragraph's parent element is the body element, right? But if the element itself has its own style, then that style is going to be applied. So let's say for the second example here, you see here we have a body and then we are doing inline styling with background color and font color. And then we have a heading. It also has its own inline styling. Then we have a paragraph, and then we have another paragraph. The thing is, the second paragraph has a style rule, but the first one doesn't have any style rule. So the first one's font color is going to be the font color which is mentioned in its parent, right? So that's why you see the font color is this. But for the second one, the font color is being defined by its own style rule. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, if your parent has a style rule, then you will inherit it unless you define your own style rule. In that case, your own style rule is going to be override your parent's style rule. So I hope the inline style is now clear. Okay, so next let's talk about the embedded styles. And the embedded styles are configured in the head section of the page. And it uses the style element. And this gets applied to the entire web page. So the style element has both the opening and the closing style tags. So you can see one example here. So configure a web page with white text on a black background. So what we do is we use this style element. You see here, this is the opening style tag. This is the closing style tag. And inside the body, inside we have the rule, right? So the rule, the syntax says like we have these selector. So it says the body is going to be affected. The body element is going to be affected. And then we have the declaration. We have multiple declarations here, a semicolon separated. So here is an example after embedded styles are like configured. So this is the style rule, and you see the rules are defined for different elements, right? So if the page has multiple headings, all the headings are going to be affected. If the page has, obviously the page is not going to have multiple body, but it can have multiple headings. So this is how embedded style applies to everything in the page, not just one element. So let me show you an example. You see here is one page. And if I go and check here, you will see that this one has head, the body section, but nowhere we are seeing any styling getting applied, right? If I go here, now you see this one is the same thing, same page, everything is same. The only difference is inside the head, now we have an style element. So that means it has embedded styling and it has rules, say body, header 1, heading 2, you see that, right? So this rule is going to be applied to everything to the body. And then if we have like inside, if we have heading 1 and then, yeah, heading 2. So these rules are actually getting applied from here. Now here is one thing. You see that even the heading 1 or heading 2 is inside the body. But if you remember, like since they have their own rules, they're going to override the rules of their body. Otherwise, if I didn't have rules for heading 1 and heading 2, the same rules for the body was going to be applied. Okay. So one another thing, except other than the color, is using different fonts, right? And also changing the size of the fonts in different places of the page. So that's why we are separately talking about some of the CSS properties for configuring text. One is font weight. This one determines the boldness of the text. Font style. It configures the text to italic style. Font size and font family. Font family actually configures the font typeface. That means what type of or what font you are using. For the font size, what value do you have to put? The values can be in 4 different kind of units. It can be in EM units, pixel units, point units, and percentage. Or we can just use text values, extra, extra small, small, medium, right? Or if we have like 100 percentage means 12 font, 16 pixel, 1 EM, and medium. So you can put any of these 5 in the value, and then you can get the same result. And you can see the sizes also here. Okay, so this is the same size font in 5 different units. And this is used for font face. So these are the common font types that we usually use. We can use font family category, and then it will select any of the fonts from here. So why do we use font family category instead of just directly mentioning the font type? This is the reason, because not everyone has the same fonts installed in their computer. So if we put font family, say Arial, what's going to happen is uh, it will try to find the Arial font, Verdana font, and finally you can see the one type of font family I mentioned, sans serif, right? So it will try to find the next fonts that are in the same family. So say the computer doesn't have Arial or Verdana font, but it has other fonts from sans serif family. So just mentioning sans serif in the last means that if you don't find Arial, find Verdana. If you don't find any of them, then find a font from sans serif family. Okay, so we'll show you some examples of configuring colors and text with properties on web pages. I have I have already shown some of the examples, but let's go and check more rules, more CSS rules. Okay, so I showed you this web page in one of the previous examples. Now let's make a little bit changes here. So you can see there is some changes, right? Especially the fonts have changed here. How did we do that? So if I go inside this, inside the head, you can see we have used embedded styling. And in the embedded styling, we have these rules where we have mentioned the selector and the declaration. And in each of the declaration, you see we have used font family, right? We have used font family. And in this unordered list, font weight is set to bold. And because of that, you see that this unordered list font has changed to bold fonts here. You see that, right? And then in the paragraph, you see we have also font size 0.9 em, right? We could put like other like instead of 0.9 em, say if I had put say 100%, you have seen like we can put different units, right? So now this one becomes a little bit bigger. So 100%, 0.9 em is actually 90%. Or I could just put medium, right? It was the same thing for 100% or 12 point. It's the same thing. Or I could put just medium. Okay. And then you see there are other rules defined here. So for the paragraph, there is text indent. So an indentation has been created. You see for all the paragraphs, right? There is the paragraph starts like some pixels away from the left. Same rule that I just showed you. Now you have seen like other rules getting defined here. Let's get familiar with some of these rules. Line height, it configures the height of the line of text. Text align configures the alignment of the text. Text indent configures the indentation of the first line of the text. And text decoration, the modifies the appearance of the text with an underline, overline, etc. Then we have text transform. Sorry. We have letter spacing, word spacing, text shadow, etc., etc. Okay, so let's talk about the CSS selectors. Already we have seen CSS selectors, but all the CSS selectors that we saw so far were HTML element selectors. But we can have like other kind of selectors, class selector, ID selector, and descendant selector. So what is a class selector? For a class selector, instead of just putting an element name, we just put a class name. So this is more configured way of using a selector. And to identify class selector, we start with dot. So dot class name. So for these examples, say we have created a rule and we have used the class selector starting with dot, and then we have named it new. Now we have a rule here. You see we have a rule here, right? How do we apply this rule to a specific element? What we use is we have to use this class attribute. And as a value, we put the name of the class. And then this, whatever rule is defined here, is going to be applied to the paragraph. So this is the class selector. Then we have this ID selector. It's same as class selector. It has only two difference. One difference is for the ID selector, we start the selector name with hash. And the second difference, and the most important difference, is if we define a rule like this, I want to apply this rule only on one element, not on every element, only on one element. Suppose this rule could be applied with everything, with any paragraph or any other element, but this rule is going to be applied only to one element of the page. Okay, so that is the important thing to remember. Probably I'm also going to ask you in the exam about this. What is the difference between class selector and ID selector? And the third one is the descendant selector. So I would say the third one, the fourth one, where we specify the element within the context of its container element. This is also known as the contextual selector. So here you can see an example. So this is an example of how descendant selector is. So this one configures a green text. This is RGB, right? Sorry. Configures a green text only for p tags, right? Only for p tags located within an element assigned to the ID named content. So the advantage of the contextual selector or the descendant selector is it reduces the number of classes and IDs you need to apply in the HTML. Okay, so let's talk about one element. This is an HTML element, span element, but this span element actually comes very handy in designing with CSS. Because we can, using span element, we can configure a specially formatted area displayed in line with other elements, such as within a paragraph. So for example, let's say here you have a paragraph. You see here. So we have a paragraph, right? So this whole thing is a paragraph. And inside that we have just this web design thing inside an span element, right? And now I just, inside the paragraph, I want to just design these two verbs. So what I do is I put them inside the span element and apply a design. So I create a rule. I name it using a class selector company name and apply it only to the span element. So now what's going to happen is you can see this whole, within this whole paragraph, only this part is going to be, sorry, I made a mistake. So only this part is going to be affected by the design. This is how a span element is going to be helpful. So let me show you an example of how class selectors or ID selectors can be used. So previously I had shown you this page, right? Now let's look at this one. You see there is a slight difference. And you can see it here. These ones actually turn red. So let's go and check the code here. What changes we made here. So you see this is an embedded style, obviously, because the style element is being used. And here you see all the selectors are like HTML element selectors, right? Except this one, dot feature. This is a class selector. And this one has a rule. It says like the color, the font color is going to be something reddish, right? Okay. So a class selector is being used. Now, inside this main, we have an unordered list, right? And inside the unordered list, we have 5 elements. You see the first 3 elements don't have any of the style rules. That means if they don't have anything of the style rules, what's going to happen? These style rule for the unordered list, which is the parent element, is going to be applied. Just bold, that's it. But the 4th and the 5th element, it has incorporated style rules of its own using the class attribute. You see that, right? And the value feature. That means whatever rule is here in the feature is going to be applied to these last 2 list elements. And the font actually now turns red. Okay, so now you see that how class selectors can be very helpful. Now we are creating a rule and applying that rule specifically to an element, and only that element is being changed. And you see this rule is applied to 2 of the elements. So that's why class selector is being used. But if I had used like ID selector, then I shouldn't have used to multiple elements. So between this page and this page, you see we have a slight difference. The difference is you can see this part is being shown with bold characters, right? Or bold letters. So let's say what changes is being made here that it became bold. So if you go to the main, you see we had this paragraph, right? Let's look at this paragraph. And now you see we have an span element here, the Trillium Media Design span element. And then there is some rule defined in the style class named class selector company. It says font weight is going to be bold, font family is going to be Georgia, Time News Romans. If Georgia is not found, Time News Romans, then serif, and font size is going to be 1.25 em, right? And only this part of the paragraph that is between this span element incorporates this design rule. So whatever design is being applied, say here in the company, right, is getting applied only on these three letters, only on these three letters, only on these three words. For everything else, you see for the paragraph, the rule, the other, its own rule is being applied. So we had discussed how span elements can be helpful in incorporating CSS designs, and here is one example. Talked about inline styling, embedded styling. In the embedded styling, we talked about HTML element selector, class selector, ID selector, right? And also we talked about descendant selector, although we haven't shown example of this. I'm going to show you examples for that as well. Now let's move on to the third type of styling, that is the external style sheets. So in the external style sheets, CSS style rules are contained in a text file completely separate from the HTML documents. In the first two types, like in the inline, it was in the body, right? In the embedded, it was in the, sorry, it was in the head, right? But in external style sheets, it's completely separate. And the file's extension is .css. It contains only style rules. This .css file doesn't contain anything. It doesn't contain any HTML tags. So here is one example of a, say, site.css. This is a site.css file, and this is all it contains. It just contains some CSS rules. And then we can apply this site.css to all these files. I'm going to show you how, right? So for applying these rules inside site.css, we use this element, link element. This is a self-contained tag. That means it doesn't have a closing tag. It doesn't have something like this, right? And is placed in the head section. This is also important. And the purpose is associate the external style sheet file with the web page. So let me show you one example. So here you see there is this color.css file. If I open this file, you see this one has a rule, just a simple rule for the body. We could put this rule inside the head using inside the style element using embedded style, right? Instead of that, we put the whole rule in a different file, color.css. Now going to this file, external styles file, let's check the code here. So here you see inside the head, we use this link element, and the relation attribute, the value is style sheet. By this, we tell the browser that we are going to import style sheet or style rules from a style sheet. and href, these attribute for the value we put color.css, the name of the file. So what it does is this file is like external styles. So this is this file. So this is external.html. Inside the head, it says using the link element is linked to the color.css. So as a result, what happens is whatever is inside the color.css, whatever is mentioned inside color.css is getting applied here. So you see that in color.css, we had the rule for the body, right? We had a rule for the body. So the rule said like background color is going to be blue, RGB, and the font color is also going to be like white, right? So let's see if it was true. Yes. So the body background color became blue and font size became white. So using CSS, we can also do other kind of stuff. Say we can center the page content. So for example, you see we have a rule defined here. Obviously, you now know this is an ID selector. It says the left margin is going to be auto, right margin is going to be auto, but the width is going to be 80%. That means if you apply this rule to an element, it will shrink its width to 80%. And then this one will actually center the page. Let me show you the example. We have this trillium.css file. And inside this file, we have this rule, wrapper rule, where it says the margin left is auto, margin right is auto, and width is 80%. And then this CSS file is actually linked with this HTML file. And inside the body, you see that there's a div element, you see that, which applies the style rule from the wrapper. If you remember the wrapper thing. So this is the ID selector. The selector name is wrapper. So that one is being applied here. So what happens is now this div class is shrink to 80%. So whatever is between like left and right, only 80%, it will shrink to 80%. Okay. And the left margin, so 10% on the left, right, 10% on the right, and 80% in the middle. So finally, you may have this question like, if my HTML file has all kind of styles in it, say it has external style sheet linked, it has an embedded style, it has an inline style, and they probably have style rules defined on the same element. Then which one is going to be applied? So here's the precedence. So this is the highest precedence, it gets the highest precedent, and the browser default gets the lowest. So the inline style gets the highest precedent. Next is the embedded styles. Now embedded style has more precedence than the external styles. And the external styles has more precedence than the browser defaults. So here is one example. We have an external style sheet, and then we have a HTML file. So this is the HTML file. Let's take a look at the code. The HTML file is linked with the style sheet site.css. And then it also have this embedded style. You see that for the body. And then inside the body, it also has inline styling. So inline styling, embedded styling, and also external styling. All three kinds of styling is applied. So let's go and check what was in the external styling. So in the external styling, it had rules for the body. So the rule says the background color is going to be something, I don't know, blackish something, right? RGB. And the font color is going to be sorry, the background color is going to be whitish, and the font color is going to be white. Sorry, black. But what happened actually? You see, the font color was changed to blue. The reason is the embedded style says the font color is going to be blue. So this rule has overridden this rule. Okay. Now everything is not blue. You see something is red in the body. The reason is inside the body there is a paragraph which has done inline styling. So this one gets the highest precedence. Everything else gets the rule from here from embedded style, but the embedded style had the same rule like as the external style, but the embedded style got the precedence, right? So this is the highest and this is the lowest. And finally, for CSS validation, after you apply the CSS rules on your page, you can just, there are different validators online. You can just go to one of the validators and submit your website page or something. It will validate if the CSS rules are perfect or if it needs modifications, like adding more contrast or something like that. Okay, so that was our discussion on CSS. We introduced you to the cascaded style sheets. We configured inline, embedded, and external styles. We applied the CSS rule to HTML, class, ID, and descendant selectors. And finally, we talked about where can you go and submit your code to see if the styles are applied correctly. So that's it. Thank you very much.